Hi guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to do a project using image transfers. And so this project hopefully will be quite interesting to you, so we'll get started quickly. So what you're going to need is some pearl white rolled out on your thickest setting on your pasta machine, and you'll want some sort of texture stamp to do a mica shift. Any texture stamp will work, preferably a beach themed one. Here I have my oyster texture stamp, but any beach theme texture will work just fine for this. And I'll be using a beach theme transfer, and the entire project is basically beach themed, but you can mess around with it and replace a few elements to switch this up a little bit. Like we're going to be using some shells and things. You could switch that for maybe some forest stuff if you can get hold of it, and then you could try and get a transfer that is forest themed. But you can switch up a whole bunch of aspects in this project to play around with. Now I've just done an imprint of the texture stamp, and it was dusted lightly with some cornstarch. And I'm just going to trim this up because we don't need any of this excess clay now. And what we want is a nice mica shift from this. Okay, there we go. And now have it stuck down on your tile pretty firmly. And then use a tissue blade, preferably, or at least this is my opinion, I find that a flexible tissue blade works the best. But any technique that you've been using will work. But this is the way I do it. I use a flexible tissue blade and I slice through. And then just remove all these little frilly bits before you carry on slicing, because they can get stuck to the clay again and cause lots of trouble. So do a slice and then remove. And then carry on. And then if you've got still some raised bits even after you slice, go back and slice those so that your sheet is almost flat. Just like that. And then I'll just continue doing this until I've finished with the entire piece of clay, and then we'll roll it flat. Okay, and then when you're done with that, grab a piece of plain printing paper and then burnish over the top of your mica shift to flatten out any areas. And you can use your fingers for this, or you can use a roller. I like to use my fingers, that's just a personal preference. And you want to burnish this completely flat, that is very important. Okay, and then when you've done that, roll out another sheet that was on your thickest setting and place your mica shift on there and smooth. Then trim away any excess clay, and this will trim up your sides as well. Okay, and so now the next part of our project is going to be using some image transfers by Lisa Pavelka, and I'm going to be using the tsunami one, which is quite nice. And I'm going to be using one of my statement rectangle cutters, which fits quite nicely on this transfer. So what you want to do is you want to just cut this out. And what I like to do is, because we have these white borders, I like to actually cut into those borders. I don't like to cut too close to the transfer, just because you can sometimes make mistakes by accident, and also because it gives me a little bit of area to play around with when we're taking the transfer off the paper. So I don't like to cut too close to the image if I don't have to. And I'm going to trim down here though, because it's a little bit wide, and a little bit around here. But I do like to leave a little bit of a border, because this white space over here actually is translucent once you put it on the clay. So now what you want to do is you want to soak that in water for about 5 minutes until this back starts to turn translucent. Okay, and so I've been soaking mine for about 3 minutes, and I've just got it out, and you should be able to easily shift this around on top of the paper. Now don't take it off, you don't want to do that. All you want to do is you want to just gently take something and dab away the water. Just be careful not to move that around too much. And then near the bottom over here, as close to the bottom as you can, gently slip this off so that just a short portion of it comes off. Stick that portion onto the clay and tap it down. Slide a little bit more off and tap and continue sliding this off and tapping along the way. And this will make sure that you have no air bubbles, because that you don't want. Now just keep in mind you will be able to see the mic shift under the image transfer. I'm not sure if the camera will be able to pick that up or not. I have to see. Now that I've got it off, hopefully you can see the mic shift under there. So you can see there the mic shift. Okay, and I'm just going to smooth it very carefully. Okay, let's have a look. Okay. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to crackle the transfer image by rolling it through a pasta machine. Now, to do this, you want to have let this sit here on the clay for about 5 minutes. So that it's stuck to the clay, it's dried out, and then when you roll it through the machine it will crackle. And this is completely optional, you don't have to do this. Now what I like to do to check is I like to stretch it very gently to see whether or not it's going to crack. Yes, there, see? You pull it, and if it cracks easily, then it means that you can do it. If it doesn't, then you've got to leave it on the clay for a bit longer. Okay? Okay, so I'm just going to take a piece of paper, pop it down, and I'm going to roll. And see if that cracks. If it doesn't, I'll have to do it by hand a bit. And I'm just flattening it out a little bit before I put it through a pasta machine, because I think that's what's going to crack it for the most part. Okay, now I'm going to run it through the thickest setting on my pasta machine. I'm going to run it through one more setting down. I'm just going slowly with this. I'm going to take it down 2 more settings. There we are. You can see we've cracked it. I'm going to take it down 1 more setting, but 2 more settings, but I'm going to roll in the opposite direction. And there we are. Now you can see the mic shift. We can't actually see it very well, which is fine. All we want is this very slight swirling in the background. Okay. And so now what I've got to do is I've got to figure out where the straight point on this is. Okay, and so I've just made a line across here, and now we want the cutter's line to be sitting so that it is perfectly straight across the middle. And now I'm going to need my head over here so I can see that. Okay, and so once I've got the cutter in the right place, I'm gently going to press, but I'm not going to press completely. I just want to get an outline like that. And then I've got another cutter here which I need to get into the right place so that it's perfectly symmetrical. Okay, and I generally put this back down so that I can see it, as that makes it quite a bit easier. And then when you've done that, press firmly down on your rectangle, and make sure you press firmly because this transfer can take a little bit to cut through. And do the same with your square. And I'm just making sure down here that I've cut it out completely. And then I'm going to lift and remove this and press down again, just because you can see you've got some of the transfers coming off. That one should come off nice and easily. Just use a craft knife to take that out, and then use a craft knife to gently take off these pieces of transfer that will have come off. Okay, because we want to just clean up these edges. There we go. Nice. And so we'll just move this out of the way. And I just want to put my cutter back down, make sure it's all symmetrical. I've just got a little line here that I want to smooth out with my finger, because in the pearl white it basically picks up any lines that you might have accidentally put in there. Okay, and now what I want to do is I want to set this with my heat gun. So I'm going to grab my gun, or if you're working on a tile that can fit in your oven, then you would put this in the oven for about 15 minutes just to set this up. But I'm going to show you how to do it with a heat gun. And now you can use any heat gun, an embossing gun will work just fine for this. Just if you're working with a gun like mine, just want to show you the logo quickly so you can see which one I'm working with. You will have wind speed, so 2 is the highest, 1 is the lowest, and then you will also have temperature. You want to set it not on your highest temperature or your lowest temperature, you want to set it around about the middle setting. And then you'll switch it on to the lowest wind speed, and then you will cure it. And once you have cured it, you should be able to press on it without it distorting. And your top of your clay shouldn't stick to your hand at all. Now you want to let that sit and cool a bit before you start to lift it off of the tile, because if you lift it off now it can distort by accident just because it's fairly hot. And so this might be an opportunity to go around and nitpick along the sides if you have anything that you're not quite happy with. I'm pretty happy with it. The cutter cut quite cleanly. I'm just trying to get rid of any little bits of transfer that might be left. Okay, and so that should be cool enough for me to lift it. I'm going to do it very carefully, and if it feels like it's sticking to your tissue blade, stop and let it cure a bit longer. But you should be able to lift it cleanly. There we are. Now it is still raw on the back, which is what I want. It doesn't necessarily have to be raw on the back, but it's going to make the next step quite a bit easier, because we're going to take another piece of pearl white and use it as a backing. Okay, and so I've used up the leftover clay that had the transfer on it, so you can see that the transfer has crackled throughout the clay. But that doesn't matter, because we're not going to see this part of the clay. We're just going to take our piece, gently lay it on top, smooth to make sure that it's well stuck. And this is why I like to have the back still raw, because it means I don't have to worry about liquid clay. Now be careful, because this is still pretty fragile, since you've only baked it for a short amount of time. Now if your cutter doesn't fit exactly, which is a fairly common occurrence, like this square won't go in there unless I push quite hard, don't push, you will crack it. And I want to check if this fits, not perfectly, it has to fit to the T. If it doesn't, don't do it, use a blade. You can just use the use your already baked piece as a template. but don't be tempted to use a cutter that doesn't slip into place without any pressure whatsoever, because you will snap your project. So don't be tempted. And then I'll just use a craft knife in here, which is easy enough. There we go. Now just go and smooth the edges. Like so. Okay. And then very carefully you will lift this up. There we go. And then I just like to go around the edges and make sure that it's all properly stuck on. Okay, and then look at it from the front, make sure that it's all correct. There's a little bit over here that needs to get trimmed off. There we go. And I know I'm being fussy, but that's a good thing to have when it comes to this. Now just pop that off to the side, and you want to do it bake side down. That's always best. And you want to prepare another piece of pearl white. Okay, and I've just rolled that out on my metal setting, which is about, let's see, about 1 millimeter thick. And now I'm going to take some coarse sandpaper, and I'm going to texture this. And I want to use sandpaper because it's kind of beachy, you know, the texture. And just, I like to overlap it a few times, just to make sure that I get a really nice texture. Okay. And that is going to be our backing. Then I'm going to gently smooth the front, because having been on the tile it will have accumulated a few shiny spots. Check the back, make sure you're happy with it. What I actually think would be nice is if I took a piece of plain printing paper, pop that on, and then textured it a little bit more, because then the other side will pick up the texture of the paper. And it can be a little painful, so I like to texture my piece first and then just lightly texture it a little bit more, because the clay won't stick to the paper, so you're going to have it lifting up. So it's not a great way to get the initial texture, but you can use the sandpaper to essentially get the paper to texture the other side. Then pop that down, sandpaper textured side down. Bring over your piece, pop that down, and again, because it's raw we don't have to worry about it, leave that. You don't want to be messing with it, you only want to trim the outside. And again, I prefer to use my blade, especially with this sort of a shaped piece where you just have to essentially use a straight blade and just cut the 4 sides. It's super simple. Don't have to worry about anything. It's just less risky than using a cutter, which might put a little bit of pressure on the front. And then I like to take a blade and actually use it to smooth the sides. I know it sounds weird, but I'm actually using the side of the blade here, not the cutting side, to smooth, because you will have seams in here. And then it means that if I do have any out areas that aren't sitting properly, it means that I can get rid of those while I'm smoothing. But yeah, I'll just continue smoothing along until I'm happy with it. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pop this in the oven. You should be able to pick it up without your blade, because that will help you with the sandpaper. Okay, and we are going to do a smear around these edges. So I'm just going to smooth, and I also want to do a bail, but I would like to do the bail after we've smeared the edges so they're nice and neat, and then we'll just stick the bail up at the top here. So I'm going to go and bake this for a full hour at Primo's recommended temperature, and here is what it looks like. And we're going to do a whole bunch of things in here. Let me just show you. We're going to be using these little seaside things, and I do sell these on my shop if you can't get hold of them. And they've got little urchin pieces, we've got little shells, lots of little bits and pieces. So if you can't get hold of these down at the beach, if you don't live near a beach, you can have a look at that. They're only $3 Aussie each, so that might be a nice way for you to get them. And we're just going to fill this whole thing in here with that. Okay, so now that it has baked and cooled, you can see it's nice and hard, it's not going to break. And I'm going to take some pearl white and just warm it up in my hands, because you want to have it as soft as possible. Then I'll roll it out into a little tube, and I want to just smear this along the edges. And all we're doing essentially is we're filling in the gaps that do appear when you have multiple veneers on top of each other, like here. And so it just leaves a much neater side. And it also means that there's very little to no sanding needed later. So you'll smear one side, then you'll smear the next one, and so on until you've smeared all of them. And now we're also going to add the bail while the smear is still raw, because this will help our bail adhere. I will probably also add a bit of liquid clay for security. But yeah, we're going to add the bail while our smear is nice and raw, instead of baking it and then doing the bail. And now another idea is you don't have to necessarily do this as a pendant, which is what I plan to do. Another idea is a fridge magnet. You could just, once you'd finished basically, you would skip the bail, but you would smear the sides like I am now. Then you would bake it, you would put all the stuff in here, pop the resin on the whole thing, and then basically when I would be ready to string it, you would just stick a magnet on the back, and that would be a fridge magnet if you wanted one. Though this is quite a bit of work for one fridge magnet, so I've decided to make it into a pendant. So you should have nice edges like this, and then just go around and smooth, because you will have some rough bits, and then you basically would bake that if you're going for a fridge magnet, but because we're going for a bail, you'll run out another piece of pearl white polymer clay. And then I'm just going to trim it to size, because I want a long rectangle. And then we will use that rectangle and some sort of tool that you're going to use to wrap that long rectangle around so that you can form a bail. And then just press a little bit and then roll back, and that will show you where you need to trim to get it to meet up nicely. Okay, and then just gently press it together so that you get rid of that seam. And this is the part that's going to be sitting against the bead. There we go. And then just gently smooth, and I'm trying to get it, there we go. Gently work it off, and then just tap on each side to flatten it out. And there's your nice bail. and it's going to go sitting at the top over there. Now I am just going to grab a skewer quickly, and I'm just going to position it on the skewer there, and just, actually that's not the best way to do it, never mind. There, this is the best way to do it, so we can see where it needs to sit to be symmetrical. Okay, and then once you've got it into the right place, use the skewer to press your bail into the right spot. Just like that. And then I'll actually just use my craft knife here to gently smear this onto the smear, and then generally you can get your finger in there to smooth. If you have any rubber tools or anything like that, you can use that, but for those of you that don't have them, you can just use your blade to quickly touch it up, and then just go in there with your finger and smooth that as best you can. Okay, and that is your bail. And I am going to add just a touch of liquid clay, and I'm just going to be using Fimo gel. Any translucent liquid clay will work. But I at the moment have run out of bacon bond. So I'm just going to add a slight sliver of liquid clay on that side. And now if I turn it around, I'm going to do it on this side too. And then I'll bake this for about half an hour. Actually no, I should bake it for 45 minutes at pretty much recommended temperature, because the bail needs to be the strongest part in the pendant actually, so I shouldn't skip on the baking. So I will bake this for a good 45 to 60 minutes in the oven. Okay, so it is out of the oven and it is still a little hot, but this is basically what it looks like. And I'm just going to set it off to the side here to cool, and in the meantime we're going to mix up some resin, and I'm going to be using ice resin today. And I think we're probably going to want around, let's see, I'm going to want about 10 mils. So I'm going to start with the resin part first, and I'm going to mix up 5 mils of this. And I like to start with the resin part because it is the thicker of the two parts, and I just find that it's easier to do this. And another thing is, if you mix up a small amount, first pour a bit into the cup and then get it to reach to the edges, and this will help you get more accurate measurements. So just get it to touch the edges and then continue pouring once it's leveled. And now if you're a little intimidated about this, you can get an ice resin plunger. They're much easier to use. I need to replace mine because it's gotten very sticky after it has been refilled quite a few times. So I need to replace mine, so I'm busy just measuring out like normal. But yeah, you can use a resin plunger. You could also use magic gloss as well. The only problem with that is you have to be very careful when you're working with your inclusions, because the inclusions can interfere with the magic gloss and the UV lamp. If the magic gloss isn't penetrated by the UV lamp, then it sometimes won't cure. So I find it better to use a 2-part resin that will cure no matter what than a UV resin. But you can use magic gloss, just be careful. But the ice resin works really well. You don't have to worry too much about it, especially if you're using a plunger. If you're using a plunger, all you need to do is just make sure that you mix it up properly. And now I'm turning this just to make sure that I get all the little bits and pieces as a mix. And I'll mix this for about 3 to 5 minutes. Or until I have gotten rid of all the streaks, and I will mix another minute or so just to make sure that I have got everything. And we're going to be working with some shell inclusions today, and I will show you that in a little while. And for those of you that don't have shells, I do have a solution and I'll show you that also. But you can also work with other things that aren't beach focused. Like I said at the beginning of the tutorial, you can use bark, you can use moss, you could use flower petals. There's lots of things that you can include in the resin. You could use feathers. Feathers look really cool in resin. So don't feel constricted if you can't get hold of the beach stuff. Okay, and now you're going to want some sort of a resin mat, and I'm using this silicone resin mat. I sell a round version of these on my Etsy shop if you're interested, but I'm basically just using a silicone mat, so you can find these typically at the mall as well. Just make sure they're silicone and that's got divots in it. And I have the resin over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit and I'm going to drizzle it into my bezel. I'm not going to drizzle a lot, but I just want to drizzle in a base, and I'll explain this in just a second when we bring over our shell bits, or I'll do it now actually. The reason I want to do this is because the shells can introduce air into the resin if you haven't coated them in the resin, so I like to put the resin in a little bit of it at least in beforehand, pop the shells in, and then pour some more resin over the top. And now, as I was saying before, we're going to be using tiny little shells, and so for any of you that want to use shells but can't get hold of them, I do sell a little $3 container on Etsy, and you guys can go and check that out. And it's a little bit of shells, but it's got quite a few little bits and pieces. Now I would advise using tweezers for this. They make the process a lot easier. So I've got a little urchin piece here. And I've just got a little hair on here as well. Just get rid of that. And there you can see that it's going to stick in the resin there. Whereas if we were putting it in dry and then pouring the resin around it, you can have a few problems. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to just tip this out. And let's see what we got. I've got some coral here. And now each of these pots is going to be completely different. So I can't guarantee you getting anything in particular if you happen to get them, but each of them will include some interesting things. I do like that. That's quite an interesting frill. Here's a little urchin, I'm not sure, a spine. Let's see, got some. I don't really want to go with the translucent ones. I want to go with ones that have a little bit of pigment in them. And you can see tweezers are nice because it keeps your hands out of the way while you're doing this. Here's another one. This one's got some nice, interesting pattern to it. And I'm just trying to get it into the right position. Here we go. And I've got some little black pebbles here too. That will add a little bit of a pop. Here's another little urchin spine. Oops. And now don't worry about happening to get resin on your bead at this point in time, because we will be pouring the rest of the resin on basically, so you don't have to worry about it if you get a little bit of resin on. Okay, so we're almost full. I'm just going to take a few little bits of sand and things like that in here and place those in, because it's important to have these little bits too, you know. And the resin helps it stick too. So here's another piece. That's quite nice. and we'll just add little bits and pieces in throughout. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to bring this off to the side here for the moment, out of the way. And our resin here has been sitting for a little while, and you can see that all the bubbles have come to the surface. And now we're just going to blow those away using a straw. There we go. I'm just going to take this and I'm actually just going to pour straight into the bezel. And now what you're going to find is they're going to have moved around. So just take a little skewer and move them around again, back into place. There we go. And this might give you an opportunity to add another little piece. There's a little blank spot there, because the resin essentially magnifies everything, and so areas that looked fairly busy before can look a little bit more empty. So I like to add as much as I like before pouring the resin in, but then afterwards sometimes I want to add a bit more. There we go. Just turn that around. Okay. And then you could leave it like that if you wanted to, but I would like to add some more resin. And now that I've filled in our bezel, I want to just be a little bit more careful with the resin. I'm going to pour a little bit onto the rectangle because it is a fairly large piece. And then I'm just going to scrape that resin all around. And so hopefully you can see how beautiful that pearl white looks at the moment, because we've put the resin on, how dull it looks down this end. And this is why I haven't bothered to sand. Essentially because first off, I want to be very careful with my image transfer. I don't want to be going and sanding when I have an image transfer on my piece, because it's just all too easy to accidentally sand it, and then, well, you encounter problems there. And the resin, so long as you don't have any blemishes like little spots of black clay that accidentally got onto your pearl white, so long as it's nice and clean, you don't have to do sanding. The sanding is going to do absolutely nothing as far as giving the piece any more shine than if you just left it matte and put the resin on. I mean, it's going to look even more shiny with the resin being on matte clay than it is with no resin on shiny sanded buffed clay. Okay, and now that I've spread it out, just trying to maneuver this around, just mixing up a little bit because I saw some streaks. Okay, I want to pour this on, but don't pour it near the bezel, because if you do that you will displace some of your components. So just try and get it in and around the bezel, but not actually on it. Okay, and I'm just going to lean over to see if we're getting a dome, because I don't want to go overboard. I think I can pour the rest on there. And then I'll just pop that in there and leave that to cure, and then you'll be able to pull it out. And then this, I'm essentially just going to let rest for a few minutes. But I can see that already a few bubbles have come up, so I'm just going to take my straw and blow. And then as it cures, you have about 45 minutes with this if you're working in cool weather. I probably have about half an hour to 40 minutes to work with this, and the bubbles will all rise during that period. And then I'll just slowly blow them off, and then I'll let it cure for about 12 hours at least. If you're going to be wearing it, it's best to leave it for about 24. Typically I don't wear my pieces after having made them, so I just pop them into a little bag and keep them out of the way. But if you're going to wear it and just expose it to wear, you want to leave the resin for about 24 hours before actually wearing it, just so that it cures correctly. And then once it has cured, we can move on and we can string it, which should be fairly simple. Now I just want to maneuver this because there's a little bubble at the bottom, I'm pretty sure, so it keeps on floating up, and I don't want that because it will distort my dough. So there, I'm going to place it that way up, so if the bubble wants to come out, it can. Just twist it around, and there, maybe you can see that little bubble. It doesn't really want to come out, so I'm just going to twist it that way, and then it can come out if it wants to, instead of the piece floating to the surface, which is not what I want. Okay, so I'm just going to go and leave that to cure. Okay, so our piece has finished curing. You can see that resin's quite nice. Now you might notice that I changed the shell in here because this one, the other one was just floating up and it was giving so much trouble. And I also put a little purple piece in there because I thought it needed a little bit more colour. So I did just change that after I switched off the camera. And you can see at the back is all nice. And we didn't have any leaking around the bail, which is always nice. That can be a little bit of a problem when you have the resin. But overall, it's all finished and ready to string. And so you can just use something like a ready-made rubber cord or kamihimo or something like that in this aspect. But basically, you just slide your rubber cord on and you're done. Very easy, very simple, very effective. And so I do hope that tutorial was helpful to you, and if it was, please do let me know in the comments below, and do let me know on what variations you're going to play around with, and let me know what you thought about the image transfer technique. I was completely playing around with them and I happened to pull on one by accident and it cracked, and so that's what led me to playing around with this technique, and I'm really happy that I discovered it because it looks really interesting. It looks like a mosaic almost. But you don't necessarily have to do that in this project. If you don't like doing the crackle, you would just not put it through a pasta machine. You would just cut out the bead, just like we did in this tutorial after it was crackled. So don't feel like you have to do that. And do check out my cutters on Etsy and my texture stamps. I will have a link to that in the links below. Again, you can use any cutter that you have if you have some, and you can use any texture stamp you want if you have some as well. And if you live by the beach, these should be readily available to you as well. And if you would like to support me on Patreon, that would be super helpful as well. I will have that in a link in the description below as well, and you guys can go check that out. I have a bunch of different projects on there. An example of one of those projects, let me just bring that over because I just finished making it, is this one. This is what I'm calling Tsunami. So this is the sort of things that you'll find on Patreon if you're interested in having a look at that. And there will be a link for that in the links below. And so I do hope that this tutorial was helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.